Hi, I'm Kathy from the Delafield Quilt Company. Thank you for coming back. If you're new here, welcome. This video is going to be about block number 2 that's from the 2024 Summer Sew-Along. And in case you missed block 1, just visit our website at delafieldquiltco.com and click on Quilt Alongs, and then you should see at the top of that list 2024 Quilt Along. And that'll take you right to the landing page where you can get the free pattern to download and the one for this block, as well as a link to the video. And before we get started with block 2, I just wanted to send a special thank you to all of you who had left comments and nice thoughts and shared your stories similar to my own with my mom. In case you missed the video from last week, I just shared a little bit of an update, a life update, and unfortunately my mom had passed away from glioblastoma. And I was just amazed by the wonderful comments, supportive comments, prayers, and really all those who have also been impacted by glioblastoma. For something I'd never heard of until my mom got it, it seems a lot more prevalent than I had ever imagined. And my heart goes out to those of you who have also had lost a loved one because of that. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. I really, really appreciate it, and I read every single one of them. All right, one more thing before we get started on block number 2. For those of you who are sewing along, I want to give you a little preview of next week, block 3, because there is a foundation paper piecing pattern that we're going to be using for that quilt block. I'm going to make that available so when this video releases, you can also download that and print it for free. Or if you don't have your own printer or you just don't want to print it on your own, I have it available on the website for just $2, and then I will send you the foundation paper pattern you need for block 3. All right, well, let's get started with block 2. All right, so the fabric that you need to cut for this block number 2 are, and again, all these instructions are available online. So if you want to visit our site at delafieldquiltco.com, you can go ahead and download a copy for yourself. All right, so I have all of my pieces cut and I'm ready to get started. Basically, this block has a lot going on. We're going to make a square in the square. We're going to also make some hourglass blocks, and we're going to make 4 at a time flying geese blocks. First, let's get started with the square in the square. I'm going to need my Fabric 4 Pale Pink, the 3.5 inch square. And then from the chartreuse color, I'm going to need the 4 2 1/8 inch squares. I'm going to set these other pieces aside for now. To make these pretty simple, we're going to just draw a diagonal line from one corner to the next on the wrong side of all 4 of these 2 1/8 inch squares. And you want to use a pencil or another fabric-friendly pen. And I do like to use this 45-degree mark on my ruler. And I usually place my ruler just slightly below the points. That way I've allowed for the thickness of my writing object. And I'm just going to repeat that on these other 3 squares. Okay, now that I have those lines drawn, I'm just going to start first with the upper left-hand corner and the lower right-hand corner. Just going to put a pin just to keep these down. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew right on the line that I drew for both of these pieces. Okay, now that I've got those sewn on, I am going to trim, and I'm going to trim to make sure that I'm not cutting the piece off that I need. So I'm going to just make sure that I trim 1/4 inch from the sewing line that's on the corner side. And same for this other side here. Then I'm just going to press these towards the corners. And I'm going to repeat the process for these other corners. Same thing. Going to lay these in the corner. Going to put a pin in there to keep them in place. And also the bottom corner here as well. And you do want to make sure that your corners are lined up. Otherwise your size might not work out correctly on your block. And then again, I'm just going to sew right on this line here. Okay, got that sewn. And again, I'm going to just cut a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then press to the corners again. Okay, that is a simple way to make a square in a square. You could try to figure out the triangle size so you don't have to use an entire square and have these little pieces. I just find that to be a little difficult to line up, so I just prefer using the little square on the corner method. And this should measure 3.5 inches square when it's all sewn together. And now let's move on to the 4 flying geese at a time. I don't need these little squares yet, so I'm going to set those aside. But what I do need are my 4 2 3/8 inch squares. I'll give them a little press here, that's a little wrinkled. And I need from the Amelia Pink the 4 1/4 inch square. Okay, first thing, I'm going to draw some lines again. I love the 4 at a time flying geese. If you've watched other videos on my channel, you may have noticed that I use these a lot. And that's just because I think they're really fast, and they usually end up pretty accurate. I know you can get like those special rulers to make them, but I just find that I don't need them. I have a few, but this method is just as good. Okay, once I have those drawn, I'm going to bring my 4 1/4 inch square, and then I'm going to put these right sides together, one in the upper left corner and one in the lower right corner. And I'm just going to put a pin just in a few spots just to keep this in place. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch along both sides of this diagonal line here. Okay, now that I've got that sewn, I'm just going to cut on that line to create 2 sections here. And then I'm going to press these towards the little triangles. Okay, now I've got these 2 pieces here. I'm going to grab a couple more of these squares, the last 2, and I'm just going to put them in the bottom corner here and make sure that diagonal goes between the 2 triangles up top here. And I'm just going to put a pin in here just to keep it in place. And same with this other guy here. Okay, and just like before, I'm going to do a 1/4 inch sewing line on both sides of the pencil mark here. Alright, I've got those sewn now. And just like before, I'm going to cut on the pencil line. And then I should have the 4 flying geese at a time. Okay, so there's my little flying geese. Now I just need to trim these. And they should be 2 inches by 3.5 inches. Mine look like they're pretty close, so I don't think I'm going to have to do much trimming other than little dog ears here. You do want to press again, and you're going to press towards the small triangle. And then to cut them, I'm just double checking the size here. Yep, 2 inches by 3.5. I do find it's helpful to cut it where the point's down. And then I put my ruler on here. And I'm going to use the 45-degree mark. And I want that point that's a 1/4 inch from the bottom to the 1/4 inch top here. So this point right here to be on the point of the bottom of that big triangle. And that way, it just helps make sure I've got the right seam allowance and lines it up pretty well with the other pieces. And then I'm just going to trim off the excess. And then once I've got that part done, I just flip it around, and I know these sides should be right here. So I'm going to line those up with the 3.5 inch mark on the side, and then the 2 inch mark on the bottom. And then again, once I've got that lined up, I'm just going to then trim off the excess. And there is my flying geese. And I'm just going to repeat that with the other pieces here. Okay, now I've got all my flying geese done. I've got my square in the square, which is going to be the middle of the square. And I'm going to then go ahead and just sew this little part all together. If you've downloaded the instructions from the website, I do have little arrows on those indicating seam directions. So if you would like a suggestion on seam suggestion or seam directions, I encourage you to visit the website and take a look at those. But I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to sew the centerpiece, the sides here, and then sew this little star together. And then we'll get to the rest of the block. Now when I'm sewing this, I do want to make sure that my points on the flying geese match the points of the square and square. So you could pin that in place and then line it up that way so that you know that those are going to connect pretty well then. All right, there we've got the center of the block number 2 done. All right, so we're going to keep building this out, and we are going to now add the hourglasses. For the hourglasses, we're going to first make 2 at a time half square triangles. And we're going to pair up the yellow square with the green square. You should have 2 sets of those. And these are those 4 1/4 inch squares. And then we're going to pair the background fabric, or the feather one, with the pink, the popsicle color, and again 2 sets of those. I'm going to draw a diagonal line down the wrong sides of all these sets here. And then just repeat that for each set. And you might need to realign a little bit to make sure that your squares are perfect on each other. And you can put a pin in these 2 just to keep them lined up. And then we're going to just do a 1/4 inch on both sides of the diagonal line on all of these sets. Okay, and then again, we are going to cut right on that diagonal line. And then we'll have our 2 half square triangles at a time. And when you're pressing these, you're going to want to press towards the pink. And then on the green yellow one, you're going to want to press towards the yellow. Your finished size of this half square triangle block should be 4 inches by 4 inches. And then to make the hourglass block, we're going to cut each of these in half diagonally. You could layer these together and then draw a line and do 2 at a time, but I find it's a little hard making sure that these seams have a nice point in the center. So I think it's just easier for me to cut these first and then sew them together. And I am using the guides on my ruler just to make sure that I've got those seams nice and straight before I cut it. Okay, now to make the hourglass, we're going to pick the sides where you can have the pink on top of the green. Okay, so I'm just going to lay the pink on top of the green, making sure that those seams are nice and lined up in the center there. They should nest pretty well. And I'm going to put a few pins in. Put right at the seam, and then towards the end here, just so I don't lose that corner there. All right, then I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch seam line on this. Okay, and then when you're done with your hourglass blocks, they should measure 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches squared. So I'm just going to trim these just a little bit, and you want to just make sure you use that 45-degree mark on your ruler right down the diagonal seam, just to make sure that you've got it nice and squared up. All right, so these should pair up pink to pink, but you want to make sure your green is in the right spot. Like this guy here. So here's 2 that go together. Okay, now we're going to put this guy back in the middle. And then we should have 4 3.5 blocks from the background fabric. Lay those in the corners there. And then I am ready to sew this all together. And the finished block is going to be 12 inches and 12.5 inches unfinished. All right, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you haven't yet, please visit our website at www.delfieldquiltco.com. And just remember that all of the instructions are going to be on that website as well. If you go to Quilt Alongs and then 2024 Summer Quilt Along, you should be able to download those patterns for free. All right, thank you again for watching, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe. See you next week.